or actually I guess 5 o'clock, good evening. Let's go with good evening. I'm Liz Chabot. I'm the co-chair of the search committee for the next Tompkins County Public Library Director. And I'm pleased to introduce M. DeMeester-Lane, who's here to present today. M is currently the Deputy Director of Public Services and Customer Experience at the Pima County Public Library in Tucson, Arizona. And he came before our latest weather event, so there were no travel problems, which is just great. What we've asked M to do is we identified about 6 topics that our stakeholders had identified as priorities for the library. And rather than say, talk about all 6, we said, select 3 topics, discuss what practices and strategies you would employ to advance them, and how you determine their success, because we're interested, I believe, in first assessment, not just hearing about the good ideas. How would you determine their success? So we said 20 minutes of a presentation, and then we'll have Q&A, and hopefully you'll have some questions for us. There are paper evaluation forms if you'd like to fill out a paper evaluation form. There's also an online form on our website, and that would make it easier for collecting your feedback. But if you fill out the paper forms, we'll enter that into the system. So I'm going to turn it over to M now for his presentation. Thank you. And mic off.
Okay, I think that works. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Liz. I got a great introduction, but I'll probably do a little bit more introducing of myself as we go on. So first, I want to say, what's this one?
Can you turn the volume up
There we
a
go.
bit?
Would that be over there? Is this good? I can also project. So okay, perfect. Rolling with things. All right, so first of all, I want to say thank you so much to everyone for hosting me today. This has been a wonderful day. I love learning about libraries. It was wonderful to meet with all of the groups here. I got a chance to meet with almost all the staff, leadership team, and had a lovely lunch. The selection committee, the board of trustees, our partners at the foundation. I just thank all of you for putting it together, especially Liz and Sarah and Mary. She really was my coordinator through all of this. So sending me emails last night, making sure I got in okay even. So I just appreciate the care that everyone's taken with this. I want to spend a second introducing myself a little bit. I've been in libraries for 20 years. 17 of them have been with the Pima County Public Library. I started out in my university's library working for a few years as a circulation clerk and also in interlibrary loans. And then after I graduated, I was really called to public libraries. It was at the height of the recession, and so I wanted to make sure that I liked them before I went to get my master's degree. So I got hired by the Pima County Public Library in 2008, and I started as a library associate, which is a paraprofessional position. I worked in rural libraries. We're a very large county, so I've had a lot of experience working all over, but I've done inner cities, rural libraries, oversaw bookmobile for time, oversaw makerspaces, and I've worked my way up in those 17 years to Deputy Director of Public Services. And so I oversee all of the, currently all of the library locations. There's 27 in Pima County. I believe we're the 6th largest county in the country. I oversee 27 library locations, and all the staff there report up through me. I'm also in charge of all of the customer service at that library, in our library system. In addition, I'm also, I thought you might want to know a little bit about me because I am new to the community. So I included a picture of my 3 favorite people. So my wife and I really love being outdoors. This is a bucket list moment at Zion National Park when we traveled and went on a 2-week road trip this summer for our birthdays. Our birthdays are very close. And these are our 2 pride and joys, Wilbur and Professor Ichabod biscuits. So tonight I am going to outline a little bit about my leadership style. I'm also going to start talking a little bit about my strategic philosophy because I think it's important. I'm going to touch a little bit on the draft for the strategic plan that the Community Relations Committee has been working on with staff, and then I'll go into those three topics. It was hard for me to pick the three, so I'm going to touch on a lot of different things, but that'll be and then we'll open it up for questions. So my leadership style, I'm a very relational leader. Relationships and building them across the board are really important to me. So whether that's building relationships with staff or with our community or stakeholders, that is at the forefront of how I lead a library. That kind of leadership also means that I really value transparency and being open and honest and explaining the whys and the hows behind why things have to be done as much as possible. I think that the most important part of my leadership style is that I center respect. I think a library like this is a really beautiful space and it belongs to the community, and it's built with care by a lot of dedicated staff that I got to meet over the course of today. And they take a lot of responsibility for delivering services and materials to this community, and it's very clear to me that the community loves their library. And I think that centering that leadership style and respect for all those visions is very important to me. I want to talk a little bit about strategy because the question asked for the three topics, and it asked, as Liz said, for strategy and then also measuring outcomes and success. And so I want to talk broadly about strategic philosophy. I kind of think of about the concept of strategy like a three-legged table, and there's three really strong legs that hold that up. So one of that is understanding need. I was also asked to prepare a memo of outlining my goals for the first 6 months that if I were selected as director, and address that memo to staff and the Board of Trustees. And most of the content of that is understanding stakeholders and listening. And I think that gets to the heart of understanding need. If I were selected for this position, I would be new to the community, and so it would be even more important that I understand from library users, from folks that partner with the library, from the staff, what they need from the library and how important the library is to them, and whether or not we've been able to meet that need yet. The other leg of that table is advocacy. I think advocacy is incredibly important. We need to be able to be vocal proponents of the library and make sure that everyone understands the messaging of the library and what our values are and what our direction is. But that goes hand in hand with finding compromise. I think in a perfect world, we would have a library that was funded 150%, and we would have everything we ever wanted. But in reality, we do have to make choices sometimes about what's important, and it has to be driven by community need, and it also has to understand what pressures. This library is really interesting because it has several different funding sources, and so understanding what the needs are of those funding sources as part of the big picture, so we can understand how we can link in with them, whether or not it's poverty initiatives or literacy initiatives, or it's just reading for enrichment or arts and culture. I think trying to understand all of those things as part of a big picture, of which Tompkins County Public Library is one portion of that, is important, and I think that starts at compromise. So they're both equally important to me. Measuring success. I think it's very important to use traditional metrics for measuring success. So how many people attended this program that we did? What's our circulation data? We want to drive that depending on what we're looking at so we can understand, make inferences to what people want. But I also think that inclusivity and holistic approaches are just as important. And so what that means for me with inclusivity is that sometimes qualitative data and impact is the most important outcome that you can get. If you have a program that touches on accessibility in a unique way and only 3 or 4 people attended, but 2 people had groundbreaking experiences or able to do things because of what the library provided for them in ways that they weren't able to before, then that is a substantial impact. And it's important to do that. I also think that we need to understand how data, regular metrics, and those inclusivity metrics kind of all fit together to see the big picture of the library. So what are the goals? How do we think about, and in my next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the strategic plan. And so I think that's how we want to like holistically look at things. So how do we tie that back to measurements and goals in the strategic plan? I also want to say that, you know, we're still stepping out of the pandemic in a lot of ways. It's still a real thing that lives with all of us. And that has meant in libraries some seismic shifts across the country, whether or not that's staffing changes, but it is like a commitment to reevaluate what the community need is. And I think that that's important to state, that there's been a big change. And in a lot of the conversations I had today, we touched on people kind of coming back to the library or getting ready for that third space. And I see that in my community too. And I just think it's important that we understand metrics in that context. So the Community Relations Committee has done a really great job outlining priorities and goals with the strategic plan draft. I didn't want to spend too much time digging into it, but I did want to just say that like these priorities and goals as I was looking at it are like the lens that I was looking at how to think about what services we can bring to Tompkins County in these questions. So the priorities and goals outlined are community engagement and partnerships, inclusivity and accessibility, safety and welcoming space, and joy in learning and innovation. And I understand this to be a working document, so keeping that in mind, but I think that all these priorities and goals are fantastic, and they're a great jumping off point for the 3 topics that I'll go over today. So of those 6, the 3 that I picked are sustainable and responsible stewardship of resources, community hub with a welcoming and knowledgeable staff, and communicating library priorities and policies. So for sustainable and responsible stewardship of resources, so the strategic plan. Strategic plan are priorities that are coming from the community. I heard today about some of the work that has been done in the community to understand the need and how the library can meet that need, which I think is great. A wonderful 30 people at the last meeting, which I think they were very modest about it, but I was impressed by that number for a strategic planning meeting. So that's fantastic. So the strategic plan is those priorities, and the budget is how the library meets those goals. And I think if we understand those 2 things together, the budget is how we can answer the asks that are posed in a strategic plan. Budgeting is not just once a year, it's an ongoing process, listening to the community, understanding needs, working with decision makers, and as library director, my component to play in addition to those things is telling the story of the library's success to all its stakeholders. We also have a responsibility to do that sustainably. Taxpayer money is important, and we want to have outcomes that can feel tangible to y'all in the community, so you can understand that the library, this is your library, and the hard-earned money that you pay into it, you're getting out of it. So spending responsibly in a way that's connected to what the community asks for is a priority. An example of that to pull from the drafted strategic plan is the concept of a bookmobile. And I believe the strategic plan outlines that they want to have a capital fund, start fundraising for a bookmobile, which I think is wonderful. I do have some experience working with bookmobiles at Pima County Public Library. I also think it's a really great understanding of how we spend responsibly in a way that's connected with what the community is asking for. So I put 2 different examples of bookmobiles here. One is more of a Sprinter, Ford Transit type of smaller vehicle, and the other is something that's a bus, or something along a bus. That's a little bit more traditional when we think about bookmobiles. I think what's important to that is that there is a huge difference in what the community need is that could be served by either of these material, or either of these vehicles. And so to me, when we're trying to understand sustainable and responsible stewardship of resources, we want to start with the community need and spend responsibly to meet the need. And so either of these, there's many reasons to pick either one of these, but they're how we need to start from the base understanding of what folks need. So is it our books, getting physical materials and books very important? And we need as many books as possible, and then a large vehicle would be that. What would be difficult about that? And then what would be wonderful? So this is a showpiece for our library, for example. The size of it can be incorporated in a bunch of different outreach opportunities in a way that's extremely visible in the community, and we would have the footprint is its own presence and advertisement in a really amazing way. There's some limitations with staffing a vehicle of that size. I wonder about the weather conditions, thinking about this in country roads, and I'm not sure where we want to go with the bookmobile, and that's things that I'd have to learn more about. The Sprinter example is one where that's a little bit more nimble. A lot of times those kinds of bookmobiles are used in connection with STEM programs and things like that, where we're bringing different resources that need different kind of storage into the community. So when we're thinking about sustainable and responsible stewardship of these resources, making sure that we have face time with the community to figure out first what they want, so then we can shape what our direction is. In my conversations today, and also in my previous interview, there was talk about capital improvement projects and some of the hurdles there with the building needing some capital improvement projects. I think that it's really important when we think about sustainability of resources that we also think about finding outside funding sources that offset the financial burden of our partners. And so I did a little cursory looking around, and I would need to learn a lot more and rely on some great mentors to do that if I were selected for this position. But the New York State Council on the Arts does specific capital improvement project grants, and I understand that the Utica Public Library has received at least 2, if not 3 of them in order to make to do really big capital improvement projects in their library. And so I did some learning, and I think that we want to start to, we want to think creatively and explore grants. My next subject area is community hub with a welcoming and knowledgeable staff. This was a big one. I picked it probably because it felt like it encapsulated all 6 at once. So I kind of broke it down into three sections. Moving through my cards too quickly. There we go. So first, community hub. The concept of a community hub in libraries has been around for a while. It's very obvious from walking through this library today and getting a tour how much of a community hub this particular library is, and it's really inspiring. The library's central purpose is to connect people with resources, and a community hub does that. It doesn't always mean that the library is able to do everything for everyone, but the library is able to help you find who does that thing if we're unable to do it, and I think that's really important. I've had conversations, as I said, about the pandemic and coming back into third spaces. It was wonderful to see the spaces utilized today. You have a lot of really cutting edge work that you've already done, and I think that's something to be really proud of. The other thing I want to say about a community hub is that we want to make sure that the library, we're obligated as a library to provide those resources to all folks, and so we want to make sure that we are able to reach the community need broadly and that none of those needs come at the expense of another group, and that's a really important principle and value. All right, so welcoming. What makes staff welcoming? I think that the first thing that makes staff welcoming to a community is when they're a representation of the whole community that they serve. And so that begins with prioritizing hiring that centers diversity and also allowing staff to be their whole selves at work. It's also doing work in community with others. One of the ideas that I wanted to bring to the discussion tonight is one that we've done at Pima County Public Library. It's also one that we see as a national trend with cultural groups at the library, particularly at Pima County Public Library, we refer to them as affinity teams. This is taken from the Multnomah County Library in Portland, Oregon. So an affinity team is a group that's comprised of staff and also can be comprised of community members and volunteers that strives to specifically do programming to different groups. So it could be for Indigenous community members, it could be for LGBTQIA community. It's programming that's coming from staff and the community that is targeted to certain communities. And you see here a quote from the staff person says, being able to bring joy and resources to people in my community and working with people who want to do the same is the best part of being in BCLA. I've had a lot of conversations about outreach, about reaching targeting groups, who's not coming into the library, and this has been shown to be a really successful model to reach out to community members where maybe we haven't been able to connect. It's also part of being welcoming to everyone. Last part, knowledgeable staff. Knowledgeable staff can start with professional development, and of course, and my vision of libraries is that staff from all service levels and classifications have access to education that furthers their goal in libraries. The strategic plan draft talks about mentoring programs, which I think are really amazing. I would love to see mentoring programs. Maybe we can, partnering with the Finger Lakes Library System, other community libraries and other libraries in the system across the counties can work to support each other professionally. I think it's the other part of knowledgeable staff is empowering staff to go above and beyond in their service to the community. And so another part of the strategic plan talked about customer service philosophies and having a customer service philosophy. And I think there's a lot of places in my presentation where this concept of a customer service philosophy could live. I think for me, it's most important that it lives under knowledgeable staff because it helps people. It is the bridge to help to giving the best customer service, is that staff feel empowered and comfortable to understand access. So I have a dear colleague, and this is not a new term, but she's phrased the term access-based customer service, and I think that that's really important. We want to look at where we can remove barriers. The goal is always increased access, and starting with a customer service philosophy that centers that access can then bridge out to policies that are centered around removing barriers to the library. Communicating library priorities and policies. There's a rule in marketing, I'm sure that some of you have heard it. It's the 7x7 rule, which is that you have to say something 7 different ways, 7 times in order to really communicate it. And that's what I see as communicating library priorities and policies. If I were selected as the director, this would be a core priority of mine. I think that you cannot communicate enough what the library strategies and goals are. That can look a lot of different ways. It could be a director's corner in a monthly newsletter that just says what I've been up to and what we're working on. It can having an active presence in local papers, which y'all have. There's a lot of experience at Tompkins County Public Library doing that. An active presence in the community, transparency as much as possible, being really clear about phased approaches to implementing programs, to how we analyze things. Transparency is the goal, because the goal with libraries is always increased access and removing barriers. And ultimately, we want to get to a place where we understand that the library, there's 3 key components: that the library belongs to everyone in this community, that everyone has a stake in the library because of our communication, and that everyone understands why the library is important to them. And that concludes my presentation. All right. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions you have.
Why you chose Ithaca, your relationship with Ithaca.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
those of us that listen to you know that.
I think I have this.
You didn't say it.
Yeah, I'm actually a native of New York, although I come from Tucson most recently. I was born in Albany and lived outside of Albany in a small town until 5th grade. And then we regularly would come back to New York. For my childhood, it was basically every Christmas season and every summer. And I've spent time in Ithaca, both for family reunions. I've attended a few weddings. I have close family friends that are in Syracuse that we started our travels to, and I still have family. I was able to visit my grandmother there in Albany this week. And so while I do come from quite a long ways away, Ithaca is close to my heart. So it's been a very, very, very beautiful place. And I was drawn to applying for this position because of the community here. I think it's very welcoming and inclusive, and I have always really had a little soft spot in my heart for Ithaca. So thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Okay, Sally, actually. Go ahead. You're on.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So I guess the question would be, a lot of questions, but what would you see is the major change between your current position and the directorship here? Like, what would you see as the major change or major hurdles or challenges that you might face? And how would you expect the board, the staff, to help with that onboarding, successful onboarding?
Yeah, I think that there, in many ways, there are big changes, and in some ways there aren't. I mean, community building is community building. And so right now, as being part of a larger library system, my community building is really focused internally. So I do a lot of staff community building. I work with a team of branch managers and regional managers to sort of make sure that we're all working as one cohesive unit, moving towards a shared goal in our library system. And that would be similar, even though the stakeholders would be different in a community like this, which I find really exciting. I think that there's opportunities that I haven't been able to have because of being in such a large library system that this library would afford me. Working closely with a governing board, for example, I'm part of a large system. We have a library advisory board, but we don't technically have, our governing board is the county board of supervisors, and there's a few layers from me to that person. And so being able to have that direct impact on the community is a really exciting new challenge, and I think it poses a lot of different opportunities. I've heard a lot today about all the exciting things that everyone's been doing. I think the challenge would be that I'm gonna need a little bit of time to listen, and how do I communicate about all the listening that I'm doing in the first several months, so people understand I'm really taking in the community. Because it's such a big value of mine, I would need to have plenty of opportunity to be able to understand the need in like a truly in-depth way. And so I think those would be some of the bigger challenges. I think there's some technical differences just in structure and the civil service process and things like that that I also will encounter, but I tend to really love the challenge of working things out, learning new things, and trying to solve problems. And yeah, the more things to navigate, the funner it is for me, the more fun it is for me. So.
My question is, how will you work with all the county libraries and the school libraries, and bearing in mind that this is not really the county library, it's paid for by the county. It's much more individual library. And you've got multiple school districts, many libraries out in the community. How will you bring them all together to the benefit of all?
Yeah, I think I'm uniquely poised to do that because I have so much experience working in a large system and being in leadership. So it's very easy for me to understand the obligations of other organizations. We all have priorities. Everyone has different kinds of funding stressors. Everyone has abilities to do things based off of their budgetary restrictions or the goals of the group. And so I think getting to know all of them and understanding better how we can work together, I think we have an obligation to our community as a whole. So even though this is Ithaca's library, I think professionally we support our colleagues. And so those colleagues are in schools, those colleagues are in neighboring community libraries. How can we use our resources to spotlight them and uplift them at the same time that we're doing the good work that we're doing here? I think all of that's really important. I'm not sure exactly how I would do it yet because I would need to know what exactly they expect of me, but I believe very strongly that we as a community we have a duty and obligation to build each other up. And so that would be the perspective I would be taking when I'm coming into the position.
Our library, as you mentioned, is a community hub, and the community often relies on the library as a safe, accessible space during school closures, especially in California when we experience. At the same time, balancing staff safety, operational capacity, and community expectations, how would you approach decision-making around whether the library should remain open or closed when schools are closed for holidays and inclement weather? What factors would you consider? How would you communicate the decision, and how would you support both staff and patrons in the situation?
I have faced this question. It's not about school closures with snow, but it is about facilities closures around weather in Arizona, particularly when chillers go out and things like that. Considering the fact that libraries in Arizona are often cooling centers, and so we have to often manage staff safeties and priorities with the fact that the library is often the only space with air conditioning that people can exist when it gets upwards of 116 degrees, and behavior management and expectation along those lines, and also necessary closures when we need to. I think guiding policies and documents that are visible to the community that we can point to are a really important part of transparency. So we set standards and say we're unable to open the library, for example, when we have less than this amount of staff that's able to make it into the library, or we're unable to open the library under certain heating and cooling conditions that would make it untenable for folks to be in. I think it's an ongoing question that is difficult, but I think that the first thing would be setting priorities. In an engaged community like this, I would like to perhaps draft in collaboration with the Board of Trustees policies that guide that, well understanding what our obligations are legally, because I'm still navigating those things, and then bring a drafted policy to the community in a forum like this so we can have discussion about it. I've done a lot of work around staff support when it comes to safety, additionally emotional and social safety regarding trauma and the concept of secondary trauma and helping people that are in poverty and the effects that has on staff. And I've been part of some national library organizations that have worked to support staff in that work. And I was really pleased to see that there's a support component amongst the staff here that's been built in recently and supported by the foundation, which I think is fantastic as far as navigating some of the more difficult things that can happen when we serve folks from everywhere. We often serve vulnerable populations that are on the margins, and that is difficult to navigate. There's some really difficult realities to doing that work.
So, for example, in being a school principal and also serving on the board here, I know a lot of times the library would stay open when the schools were closed because the kids would use it. Sometimes schools close, and quite honestly, sometimes they close and they don't really need to close. The roads are fine in 2 hours or whatever. So is that in part of what you're thinking as well, is having your own policies separate from the county and the schools?
I think I would have to understand how the county policy and the school's policy work with the library's policy and what those not having a full framework of that, I wouldn't want to speak like directly with tangibles, but I would want to consider those policies, and then work to understand what independent authority the library has to then make the next step on what our direction would be, and if we would use the same. I'm unsure at this time. Sorry.
Question?
I'll ask this question because I am a patron of the library and have no professional connection to it. So this is a question that was asked at the previous candidates forum as well, which is that in the past few years, the previous library director was very divisive with staff. Some staff felt extremely well supported and empowered, and other staff felt targeted and excluded. And it sounds like you have a huge amount of experience in terms of staff kind of support and services. So I'd like to hear specifics about how you would kind of, like you're saying, you're coming into this as a new person who is not familiar with those dynamics of the specifics that's going on here right now. How would you handle that when you get here? People are coming to you, they said this, they said that, this person's not good, this person's not good, right? Like how do you, it sounds like you have experience with handling that. How would you handle it?
Yeah, I have experience working in libraries where there was difficulties with morale coming in as a new manager and navigating that. I managed the main library in downtown Tucson for a time, and there was a lot of division, sometimes amongst different staff. I think what I started with was meeting with I think it's important to meet with everyone. That would be some of the first things I would do, is have individual conversations with everyone and have standing meetings with everyone. So I would meet regularly, of course, with my direct reports, but everyone in the library could expect to meet with me quarterly or something along those lines. I'd have to figure out how we're doing scheduling and things like that. But I think expecting a regular amount of FaceTime from me is really important. Also, building trust with staff. So that could mean shadowing on desk, visiting their favorite programming, doing that sort of thing so we can have an opportunity to get to know each other in a professional context so that they're able to learn more about me. When it comes to personnel issues or things like that, I think the very first rule is confidentiality and making sure that people understand there's a safe space, that things don't leave my office, that we talk about. And I have a lot of experience with mediation among staff and in the community, and I led a program called Library Restorative Practices for Youth that was really important, and it dealt with public-facing side of this situation with young adults and helping them understand their interactions with others. But I gained a lot of skills from that on like nonviolent communication and mediation and how to have earnest conversations about, are we venting? Do we want to fix this thing right now? Do you want me to talk to you about how to fix it? Things like that. So those are some guiding skills that I have. I think structuring conversation is really important. I usually use a conversational method that's called SBI, which stands for like specific behavior impact. And so we can talk about hard interactions that we may have had with each other as a team, but we have to use specific examples, describe the behavior that happened and the impact to you as an individual so that we can really like deal in tangibles. I also think morale building is really important. Like I can't overestimate enough like the value of like a potluck and stuff like that. That's really like continuous community building among staff. I often, I described earlier today, I like to play games a lot. I'm like a board game person, and I have a couple like different cooperative games that are really fun that you can all play together, where you sort of, one of them's called First to Worst. It's a really like silly game where you like play as a team against the game, and you rank really wild stuff like chairs and buses and memes all together from like what's your favorite and what's your least favorite, and then the rest of the team figures out which one it is based on what they know about you. And it's pretty fun, and I think it just helps like break down barriers. I think that kind of stuff to build camaraderie around staff is really important. Enjoying each other first so that we can get through hard conversations. I mean, conflict is part of life, and it's how we react to that conflict that's the most important part. And so learning how to navigate that is important.
Is there like a program
item or collection at TCPL that is not reflected in a library that you worked with before, that you're like excited or interested in learning about more, or you're excited in like expanding it?
Well, I'm not sure about expanding because I don't know how extensive anything is. Like, I think I was really interested in the local history section. I think that's a really beautiful looking collection. I asked a couple questions about it. I thought it was a really well displayed and put together and curated, initially when I looked at it, collection of local history that seems, sometimes special collections can get really, really big and like kind of like lose the plot a little bit. And it seems like this one, I had some questions about it, and it seemed like this one was honed in a really special and unique way. So I really liked that. I thought the makerspace was like really, really awesome. I'd have to learn more about the flow of people and what people want to know, what to explore. But every part, I mean, the mural in the teen room, I could go. They were great. I really loved looking at everything. There's so much dedicated space in this library to all groups that it was really inspiring to see how everyone has a little carved out niche in this big building. So.
Sophia.
So last year, the library had a very big weeding project that had a pretty big impact. So I was just wondering about your philosophy on weeding.
Weeding is a really big topic in libraries all the time, and it can be subjective, and so that can be really hard for us to navigate in our profession. I can't speak to the situation with weeding here because I wasn't here, and it doesn't feel fair to everybody involved, including the staff that are here today. I couldn't speak to it. I know that recently we've put limitations on weeding in place because of the Baker and Taylor situation. So for those of you in the community that don't know, Baker and Taylor supplied and processed 75% of the materials for 75% of the public libraries in this country, and they closed in October. And that has caused a cataclysmic wave. I know it's touching you all because we've talked a little bit about it. There's only 2 other companies in the country, really, that supply to public libraries. And so that poses a lot of challenges. At my library system right now, we've had some challenges because we have to go through a procurement process in order to adjust the cap on the contract we would have with another company. So that's caused some delays. We've also a lot of libraries have had to change dramatically how they staff the libraries because this particular company, libraries have spent the last 20 plus years staffing according to the understanding that this company will be processing the bulk of the materials. And so libraries have gotten away from internal processing of materials. Jacketing, doing all the books now usually would come, and so these other companies require more processing, and it's kind of getting in the weeds. But speaking of weeding, but we've had to change our weeding policy as a result of that because we're concerned about folks both not being able to place holds on, or their holds are very long, or best-selling items are not available, and seeing less material on the shelf if we're weeding at the level that we had to do. I think weeding for condition is important. It's around messaging, really, and how the public understands that sometimes we have to take a book out of circulation in order for it to be, for the community to have beautiful books. And sometimes books can get really grubby when they move through 100 people's hands. And so that's really the motivating factor for moving a book off the shelf. And if it's popular enough, we can buy another copy to replace it. If it wasn't popular enough and we had to say move it to the Friends book sale, that's where it would go next, and it'll live another life. But I think weeding, when we as it involves the public's understanding of weeding, I think just making sure that we have a message that it's not about taking books out of the community. It's about putting beautiful books into the community and how we do that. Sometimes we have to make space for those beautiful books.
Didn't you mention earlier the concept of if you knew you had to read a certain
Yeah, I did when y'all were speaking to me earlier. Because I can't speak to the concept or what happens in particular in this situation, I said conceptually, if I were becoming the director of a new library and I saw that the collection needed weeding because the quality of the books physically from use was not up to par with the community's needs, I would want to do so strategically. And what that could look like is setting a multi-year plan, for example, to weed at a certain level, like say 20% of the books, while we're increasing the collection budget by 20%. So it's not something that the public would feel. You could also have community campaigns where folks could be invested in buying new cookbooks, for example. Some of our, we need new cookbooks and we want to increase it. And so it's a one in, one out sort of situation that would just need to be strategic. That's probably how I would approach the subject, so that people never felt like, that their community has less books in it. I think that's really impactful to folks. And part of that strategic lens that I take is about compromise. And so it means maybe that we have to go a little bit slower to get to the end of where we're going, but it means that the community is there with us while we're doing it.
I have an odd question. Looking around this room, I see that there is you and one other man here. And I think, and I wonder how you respond to that situation.
That's an interesting question. I think that libraries are a diverse field, and I love everyone I've ever worked alongside, and I think that that it's important to understand gender differences the same way we understand what makes us all different around race and ethnicity and sexuality and gender identity and all of those things. So it's important to celebrate those differences. But yeah, so I do understand it. It's something I'm aware of, yeah.
Yes, I just want to ask another question about weeding, if I may. So I know you don't know about the situation here, et cetera, but given the size of our collection at this point, how do you see expanding the collection at the same time maintaining budget that's required? Because we are in a position where we really need to expand our collection. If you walk through the stacks, you'll see. How do we build a collection when you don't have that income to do so?
Well, I had some really good conversations this afternoon with leadership from the Library Foundation about wanting to do capital campaigns and where we can direct our funding strategies. And so I think that if that is a priority from the community, which it does sound like it's very important, then that would be one of my first conversations, is maybe that's how we can launch some additional fundraising opportunities in order to meet the community need. I think the funding for Tompkins County Public Library is so dynamic and interesting. It's really interesting how many municipal groups fund the library and what they fund. And so I think collections is a huge part of what the Friends of the Library does as well. And I hear that they're doing wonderful sales. And so we can think about how to do that. And sometimes it means we have to make choices. I'm not afraid to make strategic choices if we have to do that in the meantime too. I did get to watch Susan's budget presentation to the county legislature while I was doing my research, and so it informed a lot, so thank you.
Other questions?
I was going to ask, so one thing that I've noticed in the past few years here is it's very hard as a community member, to give any kind of input that feels meaningful, in the sense of like, when people gave input to the staff, it was like, oh, people are complaining to the staff are being accosted, and complained to, and it's like you come to the board meeting and the board doesn't ever give you anything back, and then you write and then they took the comment box away, and then it was like you email the director and they tell you why you're wrong, right? Like, I am really curious to hear what you would introduce in terms of ways for the community to give meaningful input to the library, because I think that's something that's been really frustrating in the past few years, and is something that I'd love to see in terms of rebuilding trust with the community, ways for the community to give meaningful input where it's not just like going into a black hole or, you know, so I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I think that programmatically, there's ways that we can introduce programming where people get an opportunity to come in and talk with me. One of the portions of my job is, it's called customer experience, and it's really customer service for the library. And so I'm the administrative point of contact for customer complaints at the Pima County Public Library. I find that when people want to give input about the library, it's because they care very much. You care very much about the library, and you want to understand its direction so that you can be part of that, and you want to be heard as a community member. And I think that that's important, and it's your right. And so I think creating pathways to do that, I would have to see what it looks like, but and how it fits into the staffing puzzle here and things. But I think making myself available regularly for people to get to know me is part of enmeshing myself in the community here in Ithaca, and it would be a very important first steps to being the director here if I were selected for the position. So I would, if I am in an official capacity, I would be happy to have a conversation with you. Yeah.
Emily, did you have your hand? No, Barbara, sorry.
So coming here probably for the first time and walking into the library, how did you feel?
It was beautiful. I really love, what do we call the central walkway that's sponsored by the French? Yeah, the avenue. I love that term, and this library is so big, but it's designed in such a way that it's actually easy to see a lot of parts of it, which a lot of township libraries that are centered around towns and cities where they're the standalone library aren't built like that, and so it's actually really unique and feels very thoughtful. I really liked how much sponsorship has gone into each section of the library. It kind of demonstrated to me a really big community commitment. That was great. I think the bulletin boards were wonderful. It was really cool to see how many the community portion of the bulletin board there. I'd seen pictures, of course, online, and so I was really interested to see the circle in the front and how the circ went, and it was a really inspiring place. And yeah, the design, the way the atrium brings in light, I think is also, that's a really nice design component in a place where it gets darker earlier for parts of the year. And I have experience doing capital improvement projects in my library system, and we've acquired a historical building across the street from the main library that we occupy right now. That building has some issues, and I got to recently go through the request for proposal process for the designers there, and so it was really interesting to see some of those design concepts kind of at play here, which was cool. Bringing in light being one of them, because the historical nature of the building that we're acquiring, there's not a lot of light in it, and so we've had a lot of conversation about how much we're gonna spend on light. So it was cool to see how all the windows really they really serve the whole building, so stuff like that. Yeah.
This is a county-owned building, in case you don't know that, and we are on the list. We've been on the list for maybe 2 years at least, for particularly outside improvements. The county has, I guess, priorities around a new center for government and moving offices around. But we do have a laundry list of, particularly on the exterior, refacing things, painting. I asked if there was such thing as graffiti-proof painting. Apparently there is not. But the county, we are on the list, at least for the exterior, to be, and the roof, yes. So we're holding them to that commitment, but we don't know how soon that will happen. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we can conclude it, unless anybody else has something they'd like to ask. Oh, go for it, Jill.
Why not? I was wondering if you could take a minute to talk about you talked about access. It's been brought up that like the library is a space that remains open or should in some circumstances remain open when other facilities are unavailable. Can you talk a bit about like the library and technology, how it provides technology, to whom it provides it, what the responsibility of the, I realize that's a pretty big question, but just like a little bit about like technology and the library's role in providing access.
Yeah, I think that the library's role in providing access to technology is a really pivotal one, and it's also changed a lot in the last 5 years especially. If your library system is anything like other library systems, we might see that folks with personal computers have maybe not needed the library. There are always going to be folks that need the library for PCs, but they may not have needed the library as often. But then there's an increased demand for digital materials that we saw in 2020 that we have not seen go down. And digital materials, they pose a challenge because of the cost of the digital materials and the fact that because of digital rights management, we only can have those materials for a certain amount of time. And so circulation of a digital material is less than half of the time that a physical material book would be, and that we're not able to buy them at wholesale prices and things like that. So there's that component. I also think that the library can do really unique things by granting them access to technology that would be sort of impractical also for them to have access to. Like, so the makerspace is a really great way of democratizing access to expensive materials and machinery that just wouldn't make sense for people to have in their homes. I also think we remain a place where we help people learn about technology, which poses certain questions that are sometimes tricky to navigate around how we help people with a variety of reasons around learning AI and things like that. Those are things that tie in with job development and stuff like that that are big existential questions for our profession as a whole. So there's a lot with technology.
All right, well, I think we will end on that note about technology, and I don't really want to talk about artificial intelligence, so thank you, Em. And if you fill out the paper review form, that's fine. You can leave it in our handy-dandy library box over there, or we do have it online. If you'd like to fill it out online, we'd appreciate getting your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so